I'm going to call the meeting to order, the Livingston County Apportionment Commission. Roll call.
Commissioner Reeder,
Here.
Commissioner Reckling,
Here.
Commissioner Hunley,
Here.
Commissioner Nash,
Here.
Commissioner Daubenmire.
Here.
The quorum is present.
This is the time for the call to the public. Is there anybody in the room? Mr. Luria, good morning. If you could tell us your name and location within our great county.
Dan Luria, Hamburg Township. I'm actually here today just to withdraw map 2, which I had submitted. As I had more time over the past half a week to look at all the maps that were submitted and to put some of the ones that looked most promising in Dave's redistricting to see how they matched up. It made me reflect on what members of the public would think of as a fair map. I think when we see maps that have all sorts of weird jagged edges, we suspect gerrymandering. And when the authors of Prop 2 drafted their resolution, a lot of their pitch was to show people maps that have been adopted that looked clearly like they were not drawn to be fair. So if you think about what that means in terms of the criteria that might be used, it means that when people see a city or township broken up 2 and particularly 3 ways, they wonder what's going on. In other words, if these units of government mean anything, it should be desirable to break up as few as possible. And these double and triple breaks are particularly sort of suspicious looking. The other thing is, to call a little bit of attention, because I don't know when Sandon puts these into a different format, whether we'll get the same summary statistics we get from Dave. But a lot of what the public means by a fair map is captured by this metric called compactness. Because if it would work for the population variance, and you could actually just take the county and draw only vertical or horizontal lines and create all straight line districts, people would think of that as being a clearly non-gerrymandered map. And when I look at how mine scored on compactness in the 70s, that's really unacceptable when we have maps that are scoring. I think there are 6 or 7 maps that score 90 or above, and we even have a map that's at 100. And to me, a map with 5 breaks, even though it doesn't break up any cities and doesn't have any triple breaks, and that has a compactness score of 74, is clearly inferior to a large number of the maps here. And so I'd like to withdraw it. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else from the public here in the room that wishes to be heard? Mr. Houlihan. Good morning.
Morning. There's 2 things I want to mention, but one on the maps, I think I support obviously my own map that I submitted. I think it keeps a lot of the like communities together, and it keeps several major townships whole, or makes some major ones whole. The Heartland area, Genoa Township, Marion, the Marion south of Howell, and Putnam, Pinckney, along with the west side and in Heartland. And I know there's a lot of talk about that's the way cities annexed and the discontinuities or continuities with particularly with Marion and Howell, and a little bit in Brighton area. But there's one thing I looked at is Ingham County, because Lansing's shaped pretty strangely with Lansing Township, the city of Lansing, East Lansing, and situations that are similar with annexations. One part of, I can't pronounce this, but Alien Township that has a precinct to the city of Lansing in it, Jackson National Life Building, if you're familiar. That was put in a district that has no other part of Lansing. Was no big deal there. Lansing Township is split into different areas because it has to be as well because of continuities, and some of those are actually the same precinct. So I don't see any issue with having Marion Township the vast majority of it that's separate from City of Howell borders in a different district. Thank you.
Anyone else in the room that wishes to be heard? Good morning.
Morning.
Tell us your name and
Yes.
location.
Jordan Genso, City of Brighton. I just actually, since the issue of contiguity was brought up, something that I wanted to relay to the committee since 10 years ago when I served on the committee. We were not aware at the time that Marion Township had islands, or at least it was never brought to the committee's attention that there were islands of Marion Township surrounded by the City of Howell. And so the current districts, being non-contiguous, I think had that information been provided to the committee 10 years ago when I served on it, I think it would have been taken into account. And I do think it should be taken into account since it is one of the primary things is that, yeah, you want contiguous districts. I mean, you wouldn't want, a precinct that doesn't touch the others. So I guess you shouldn't want islands or pockets of houses that, don't have the same commissioners as all the neighbors around them. So that's something that I think the committee should consider. I also just want to point out when deciding which municipalities to split up, you have the townships, which are 36 square miles each, and then you have, the City of Howell and the City of Brighton. City of Brighton is less than 3 square miles. I don't think if you're going to split up a municipality, I think it makes a lot more sense to do so with the much larger townships since, that's unavoidable to, not split anything. So that's where I think any splits should occur is in the townships. Thank you.
Anyone else here in the boardroom that wishes to be heard on call to the public? Hearing none, I'll go to Zoom. I see Commissioner Drick, you have your hand raised. If you wish to be heard, go ahead. If we can unmute. Hold on, Jay, we still can't hear you.
How's
There you go.
that?
Perfect. Go ahead.
Thank you. J.R. Drick, City of Howell, P 25989, which means I've been an attorney licensed in Michigan for over 45 years. Number one, legal issue. Please go to the Court of Appeals quickly to get an extension, to get a ruling on whether your time limit starts August 12th or September 16th. Only one of them can be right. Got to get the right one. And I believe there's precedent for Branch County having done that. Item number two, the 1966 statute contains no definition of quote contiguous unquote. In the 2012 map that was developed back then, Commission District 5, Commission District 3 were separate and have been separate ever since, despite the context, which there were small tracts in Marion, but put in the city. No litigations ever commenced to object to this, or force the city and Marion to be combined as contiguous. For 9.5 years, everyone in Livingston County with a grievance had notice and an opportunity to sue to compel contiguity. Maps existed and the reality existed. I declare that the chance to compel the word contiguous to our current process has been irretrievably and legally lost based on the doctrines of statute of limitations, latches, which means they sat on their hands, and the notion of course of performance of all the elections that have occurred. I believe that it's just not mandatory anymore for that two areas. I believe that maps 3, 4, 7, 9, 10, and 13 were constructed in good faith, but under a concept that is legally indefensible. Contiguous to the City of Howell and Marion is, I believe, optional and can be ignored. And surprisingly, the chair of the Democratic Party believes the same thing because her two maps do not glue the City of Howell and Marion together. I would also like you to look at map number 6. Right in the center is something called D7. I believe that's distorted, not close to square, extremely irregular, and it's so bizarre, it never has been called any kind of object on the entire planet Earth. At a later date, I will urge you to vote for number 1 or 14 as just and fair, but today I don't believe you should be voting. I hope you do the appropriate procedure to get up to the Court of Appeals and get your extension. Thank you.
Thank you. The next hand I see raised is for Caitlin Perry Dale. Ms. Perry Dale, do you wish to be heard?
Yes, thank you. Good morning. My name is Caitlin Perry Dial. I live in the city of Brighton, and I am here to ask you to keep our major cities whole on these maps as you consider the options. I hope you will seriously consider map number 4, which takes a look at our objectively looks at the process in looking at population variance, number of township lines broken, and compactness. Those should be the only factors to be considered when you are thinking about this independent redistricting process. So again, do not split up our major cities, our city of Howell or city of Brighton. Keep them whole, and please consider the population variance, number of township lines broken, and compactness as you choose your maps. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next hand I see raised is that of Cindy Mischowitz. Ms. Mischowitz, do you wish to be heard?
Yes, I do. Hi, Cindy McNevitt, Hamburg Township. I just want to reiterate everybody's comments about splitting up Brighton and Howell, and I want to keep the townships intact if possible. For example, Hamburg Township can be a precinct all by itself. Some of these maps look like they are drawn on the existing maps and just trying to piecemeal, how do we get this working within 9? I think we need to start fresh. I think we need to be fair and just draw the lines as compact with the population variance. And some of the maps are pretty good. So just follow the rules, and I think you'll come up with a pretty good map. Thanks.
Thank you. The next hand I see raised is for Brenda's iPad. If you could tell us your full name and location, please.
Sure, it's Brenda Lindsay from Osceola Township. And I just wanted to kind of reiterate that, you know, I just have a political feel. I'd hate for these maps to not be drawn fairly. We're working so hard to make sure maps are drawn fairly. So I just hope everyone can be as objective as they can. I really did appreciate map number 4 as well, just because it didn't seem to have a political flavor to it. So I just ask that everybody be as fair as possible. I know it's tough because there's many that represent parties on the commission, but yeah, as a voter, I hope you think of us. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else on Zoom that wishes to be heard? I'm not seeing any hands raised. I'll close the call to the public. Next item on the agenda are the approval of the minutes from our September the 3rd meeting. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Nash, supported by Reckling. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? The next item on the agenda is for Mr. Stoker on a legal update. This was somewhat addressed by Commissioner Drick during the call to the public. It's an item that I also became aware of. Mr. Stoker, good morning.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
We can hear you loud and clear.
Good. Yeah, as Commissioner Drick mentioned, there was a petition by Branch County. I think their prosecutor, who of course is on the commission, literally handled that himself. And the Court of Appeals did grant an extension. Let me back up and kind of give you a little bit of the background on this. Obviously, you know that we and the attorneys for the Clerks Association concluded that probably the 12th was the appropriate date. And to be safe, that's the date you should go from. The Elections Bureau has continued to say, no, it'll be sometime in September. And essentially received a memo, not a formal Attorney General opinion, but a memo from the Attorney General's office, essentially confirming that. And so that came out about a week ago, I guess. I think you may have gotten copies of it. The statute, let me go back and go over the statute again. I don't think the memo changes my opinion as to which is the correct date, though you may want to hedge your bets, as sort of Commissioner Dreck mentioned, that there's a couple ways to do that. The statute again in section 401 says within 60 days after publication of the United States official decennial census figures. So it's the publication of the figures that is the key language. And the again, 407, which is the one that says if you don't do it timely, you lose the right to use one of your plans and must use a plan submitted by, after that point in time, submitted by electors. That again says within 60 days, but not less than 30 days after the latest official published census figures are available. So again, it's when the official figures are available. The Attorney General's memo basically ties into the word latest, that they're going to do something in September, so that's after August, and so it's the latest. But the key, I think, is you look at it, is that it's the latest official figures. The Census Bureau itself unambiguously says that the figures are identical. In fact, if you read their release on the 16th, it expressly says that these are identical to those released August 6th or August 12th by the Census Bureau site and the various data visualizations. What they did is they put the data in a simpler form to read, I guess basically ones you don't have to use GIS. If the numbers are different numbers, and I obviously haven't checked those for each of your precincts, then the AG would be right, and it would be the latest figures that would be controlling. But at least the Census Bureau is saying they're identical. They said that they would be identical on the 12th, and when they released it on the 16th, they're still saying it's identical. So I respectfully think that essentially the 12th is actually the correct date. But obviously there's an argument you can make now that it's not the right date. At least the AG is trying to do that. That raises an issue that I don't think I've seen many people discuss, though your clerk did on a phone call to me, as did a couple other clerks. And that's that strange language in 407, which says within 60 days, but not less than 30 days after the publication. So what is the not less than 30 days all about? That becomes relevant because if you go essentially 60 days out from the August 12th date, you get October 11th. If you go 30 days out from the August 16th date, which is the date that the September release was, you end up on having basically a October 16th date. So you've got a 5-day lapse there that creates an issue. So I think it's probably worth mentioning about where the 30 days came from. And I don't think it's likely intended to be viable language anymore, but it's something that's in the statute. The original apportionment, let me backtrack. Originally, commissioners used to apportion themselves. They didn't have a commission like you are, but back into the 50s, up into the 60s, they literally apportioned themselves. When this was passed in the 60s, they included this section that if you had, and this is actually in section 401, it's not there anymore, but in 401, it had a provision that if you had a population when the act was enacted of 75,000 or less, the commissioners could continue to apportion themselves instead of using the elections apportionment commission that, your body. And so that's how the statute was originally drafted. And I believe that 407 was referring to that 30 days. Essentially, the first 30 days, the commissioners were allowed to apportion themselves and not the election commission. After that, the next 30 days, basically, you had authority. Well, that section was litigated shortly, really the very next census. In the 60s went through, we got into the 70s, and it was litigated on whether or not that language is intended to be only for the first time, or if you were less than 75,000 back in the 60s, you could always do it that way. The court, and by the way, the case was Kaiser versus Livingston County Board of Commissioners. So it was actually a case out of our county. And then prosecutor Tom Kaiser was the one who was on your commission saying, no, commissioners, you can't apportion yourself. The court agreed with prosecutor Kaiser, and so did the Court of Appeals. So essentially, that language became language that meant nothing after the 1970s. It remained in the statute, though, till 2012, when they amended it and dropped that 75,000 and under provision. They did not, however, remove it from section 407, which is the one that essentially says, if you don't do it within the appropriate timeframes, then you can't do it on your own. You have to use elector's map. Where that puts us is we've got language in the statute. It's probably not intended to mean that to be applicable anymore, but nevertheless, it's a bit problematic. And you also have the AG interpretation, which is what I think motivated Branch County to go out and get the extension. I think that therefore you need to deal with the two date issue. I agree with Commissioner Drick. You just can't ignore it at this point. There's probably two ways to do that. One would be to adopt it before the 11th and then have a second meeting and ratify and re-adopt it sometime after the 16th. So essentially adopt it twice and send it in twice. Then you will have complied with both timeframes and you won't really have an issue. The other, particularly if you're going to have difficulty getting a map narrowed down by that time, is to get the extension. Court of Appeals relatively readily gave that extension to Branch County. Again, they did that. We do a lot of work with Branch County. They did that on their own, the commission. And I think it was granted within 4 or 5 days. And obviously the approach of the Election Bureau versus the opinions that not just ours, but really the Norcross opinion, particularly that went really to all county clerks, create some ambiguity on what is the right date. I'm not sure. I guess I still agree with the Norcross quote that they don't really have a viable argument for saying it's going to be going later on. But having said that, that doesn't mean you wouldn't potentially get litigation and have to deal with a challenge of what you would do. So essentially, I think the prudent course is to look at either getting an extension or having two meetings, one that you do before the 11th and one you do after the 16th, adopting the same map, essentially adopt it once and then ratify and reaffirm your adoption again at a later meeting. And in both cases, send them in officially to the Secretary of State and file them with the clerk's office. So again, those are sort of your choices. If you need more time to work on the maps, clearly the extension would be the better choice because that would move it all the way back to mid-November before you would have to have a deadline. Maybe more than you wanted to know about timeframes, but I don't know if you have any questions.
Are there any members of the commission that have any questions for Mr. Stoker?
Dave, I just have one question if I can, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
If we asked Cole Stoker to submit this request to the Court of Appeals, what cost are we looking at from Cole Stoker approximately?
My reaction is that it would probably just be costs because I think it would probably fall under your retainer.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other members of the commission that have a question for Mr. Stoker? Ms. Dobmeyer?
I have a question on contiguity. If he could stick around and talk about that after
You can
this.
ask him now if you like.
Okay, yeah, I was just wondering what your feeling is about the second criteria in the statute that says districts must be contiguous. Do you consider that to be binding? Is there, have there been court cases over this? Is it common in other counties to have non-contiguous areas? Just whatever you can tell me about that.
It's probably not common to have non-contiguous, though you can get them. And again, let me backtrack to what I said early on in one of our prior meetings, that the statute lists all those criterias. Where it is on the list does not make it more important. And there's a realization that you're probably not going to be perfect on all of them. You can't be. The ones that are required, that have essentially some priority on the list, is first the equal population, essentially that you have to fall within the 11.9. Otherwise, you don't get the presumptions. When you reach that hurdle, then they basically look at the boundaries and the precinct boundaries, so municipal boundaries and precinct boundaries. As long as you're not to split those up, as long as you can still meet the 11.9 maximum deviation. Beyond that, then they're all the rest of them. And there's a list of about 4 or 5 other ones that are all related. And again, the goal is to try to match as many of those as you can. Again, if you're perfect on all of them, but not perfect on one of them, that's probably not going to be a problem unless the one you're not perfect on is the 11.9. I think I may have mentioned there was a case where they didn't deal with the continuity, but it was an issue of whether breaking boundaries was more important than, or whether population equalization was more important than boundaries. Went to the Michigan Supreme Court and they said, no, as long as you've got plans within the 11.9, you still have to try to at least not break up boundaries. In that case, it was township boundaries, but the same language is for township boundaries and precinct boundaries. So I think if I were in your chair, I would probably look at the equalized population first, those 2 boundaries, first precinct or first political subdivisions, then precincts, and then try to do as many of the others as you possibly can. And I think that's probably how a court would look at it. Courts have clearly recognized you're not going to be perfect on all of these. That's probably literally impossible. So, is it something you should look at? Absolutely, it's something you look at. If everything else is perfect or a much better map, is that something that you can give less importance? Probably.
So on the population, as long as it's under 11.9, is 3 better than 8? Or does the court care as long as we're under 11.9?
They basically said as long as you're if you're below 11.9 and you break less municipal boundaries, it literally was what this case was. It was one of the Wayne County cases on apportionment. If you literally if you have more than one map that's under the 11.9 and one breaks one or 2 and the other breaks 7 or 8, they're going to say you should do the 1 or 2, even if the other one had a little better deviation within the 11.9. So essentially, the 11.9 is sort of the threshold. If you make that 11.9, then you better start looking at the other ones more carefully. If you can't make the 11.9, that sort of disqualifies any other plan. It technically doesn't, because it's just a presumption of validity versus presumption of not valid, but it's an uphill battle if you're outside of 11.9.
Thank you.
Any other members of the commission that have a question for Mr. Stoker, either relating to the time deadlines that were discussed or any other matter? Seeing none, Mr. Stoker, thank you very much for your assistance. I believe it has provided some clarification, at least for me, regarding the legal complications that could result from a decision now versus later. So thank you. The next item on the agenda is a discussion of maps. We have a number of maps that have been submitted. I believe that we all have those, 14 in total. Any members of the commission that wish to discuss any matters regarding the maps?
Mr. Chair.
Ms. Reckling?
I don't know if this would fit in with this time, but it wasn't a question for Mr. Stoker. I have some really strong concerns related to the uncertainty in the date of what we are looking at in the timeline. And I think before we discuss the maps, our commission having a certainty as to what date they fall on will set forth the procedure for us looking at maps. I'm not necessarily worried about somebody having a legal challenge to our map specifically, but there are 83 counties in Michigan going through this same process. And every decade, there are counties that are sued over their maps, and it doesn't take Livingston, it takes 1 out of 83 counties to be sued, in the timeline to be questioned, and for that to bring into question multiple other counties based on the timeline that we selected. And so I don't know whether it's appropriate to have a discussion as to whether we want to move forward looking at maps or whether we would like to clarify the timeline for looking at maps first, because I think that might drive the discussion as far as where we're going with the maps.
So you want to remain on the legal update from Mr. Stoker and have a discussion regarding
If that's where you think that fits best.
we'll go ahead and do that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any other members have any concerns regarding the information provided by Mr. Stoker?
Mr. Chairman,
Ms. Steinmeier?
I think we also should discuss contiguity and how we want to deal with that before we discuss the maps, because if we decide to go one way or the other, it may mean we don't have to have Sandon calculate the GIS options of some of the maps. So we should maybe decide that.
Any other discussion regarding the information?
If no one
provided
has
by
any
Mr.
thoughts, I would like to motion that our commission file the same extension deadline request that Branch County did. I would also like us to file the same motion to waive the fees that Branch County did and ask that this commission seek from the Court of Appeals an extension deadline to November 15th at noon to seek certainty on our timeline.
That is a motion I would support as well.
So it's been moved and supported. Discussion?
I guess my question would be, as Prosecutor Reader, would you be willing to, the Branch County prosecutor drafted and submitted, would you have the ability to do that, or do you, or we can also have Cole Stoker? I'm happy with either.
Is there any discussion, further discussion regarding the motion? For myself, given the overlapping time window, we do file the motion for extension. It seems to me to be the more prudent course in moving forward. It would provide us a legal framework where we've done the right thing at the right time without having to be concerned for what happens possibly with the 83 counties across the state through the Court of Appeals process. And the challenge to any one map across the state, of course, would have a bearing on the others. If the course that Mr. Stoker set forward, if we were to take action today, and it were later determined that we were not within the time frame or the window for making that decision, it seems to me that that would open up a complete new refiling by the public for maps to this commission. And I'm not aware of what's been done in other counties across the state, but I have to compliment this commission for trying to make this as open as possible, as transparent as possible, in allowing members of the public to submit maps. And I would hate to see that the work that's been done so far would have to be, in essence, all done over again. For myself, speaking as only one person on this commission and not the chair, I am supportive of the motion to file an extension, set a backup date for our next meeting, which would be before October 11th. And if the Court of Appeals were to not to approve our petition, although I think that we all believe that they would approve it, and then setting a meeting date later on to review and discuss the maps in a more complete fashion, knowing the certainty of the legal framework within which we were working. So that's my comment as one member of this commission regarding the motion that's been made. Is there any other discussion? I'll call a roll call on the motion.
Commissioner Reckling,
Yes.
Commissioner Reader,
Yes.
Commissioner Hunley,
Yes.
Commissioner Nash,
Yes.
Commissioner Daubenmeier.
Yes.
Motion carried.
The next item on the, I guess what I would instruct is, Mr. Stoker, you have a copy of the petition that's been filed by Mr. Stempian out of Branch County.
Yes, we do. I would think you'd want to change it a little because since then we've had the AG weigh in and we've had the actual census released, which further makes it questionable which is the right date. So you'd probably want to show that as another basis for why we want a Court of Appeals clarification.
I would instruct you as the chairperson of this commission to please prepare and file post haste a petition with the Court of Appeals seeking an extension. I know in Branch County from the listserv that I have for the prosecutors across the state, that was granted within 4 days, the time that Mr. Stempian filed it. And I can tell you from the activity on the listserv, there are multiple other counties, prosecutors around the state that will be filing similar petitions and requests with the Court of Appeals, in essence, to try to safeguard against the time gap that you discussed and advised this commission on. So
I do have another question because I've been getting this question from a number of other counties as well. Would you object if we allowed them to join our lawsuit as well?
for myself, I wouldn't have any objection. I'm not sure if any other members of the commission wish to be heard on that matter.
I would not have objections.
I see a bunch of shaking heads that nobody has an objection.
I have no objection.
It's an issue. If it affects one, it affects all.
And no one else has asked at this point, but I suspect we'll be hearing a lot of this from meetings going on roughly this week. We'll go ahead with yours, and if someone else wants to join, we'll allow them, we'll tell them that this is a way you can do it. You can join. They will need to have votes from their apportionment commissions, just as you did, in order to do that. So I wouldn't delay ours simply to let them, but to let them intervene or join wouldn't make sense, quite frankly. So, and again, we'd obviously put, I've got a copy of the order of the Court of Appeals as well, so that in theory, we should have them following in the same order, though you don't always find it going to the same panel, and they don't always upvote the same way. Putting that with it, I think will give a good chance for them to expeditiously grant it. So,
it would be my intent at the end of this meeting to set a safeguard or a backup date before the 11th as our next meeting, and possibly if the petition were to be granted, to cancel that meeting and set a meeting at a later date. But again, I don't want to hold up our petition based upon other commissions around the state who may or may not have meetings scheduled and may or not be able to take action on a timely basis.
what they would probably do is request to intervene, and then if you don't, based on what you said, we would not object to them intervening if they want to try to join us.
Any other questions for Mr. Stoker? If not, the next item is a discussion of maps. And what I would propose is that we hold off on that discussion until a next meeting date to be set. On the other hand, if anybody wishes to have that discussion at this time, I look forward to any comments that you might have.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to see us discuss the contiguity issue. Are we going to treat that as something we are going to insist on in the maps or not, rather than, have Sandon calculate a bunch of maps that we might end up not considering because we decide later that contiguity is essential? Maybe we should just have that decision made now.
Any other thoughts, discussion?
Sandon? I know at one point in time you had picked up the maps that had been submitted. Are the maps already entered into the Esri product or not?
They're all in.
Okay, thank you.
I've also run some preliminary analysis on them.
Thank you.
Is it, if that's available, I would ask that prior to our next meeting or shortly after this meeting's over, that information would be supplied to all of the commission members. And we could also, if there's easy to do, we should also put that out on our website as well. Ms. Greger, you're shaking your head up and down that can be done.
Yeah, there's a couple of different avenues to do just paper maps or maybe quick to see kind of what application. There's about a couple of different criteria.
I know for myself, the map that I submitted was done with the state tool. And for instance, Dave's redistricting had the population deviation for my map at 5.59. When put into the state tool, it came out as, I think, 5.50. It actually went down some. I'm not sure what it was with the Esri product.
Well, I know with the Esri product, I ran through and ran compactness on all of them using 5 different methods and came up with an average for each actual district, and have the map set up as a color-coded range. So that's something I could include in a possible web application.
I would like to see that information for myself, because Dave's was a nice tool to use to be able to go through and put in districts, put in possible districts. I know for myself, I probably drew 15, 20 maps. I was still drawing them after I got everybody else's maps and started, some districts seem to almost reveal themselves, and you try to decide. It's almost, if you're going to end up with some splits, you're going to end up with splits with larger townships or cities, depending on how you want to split it up, because that's where all the population is. It's hard to split a Handy Township. It's hard to split a Unadilla Township because the population's so small and they're only consist of one district. But it's obvious if a split occurs, it's going to be in a larger area. But I'd like to see the underlying data because I know there was some deviation from Dave's tool, which I found very beneficial initially, to see what the differences are.
Mr. Chair, I would just remind members of the commission that we, as a board, adopted to use the Esri tool because Sandon took time to make sure the Esri tool matched Livingston County's actual precinct lines, which neither Dave's nor redistricting nor the state tool does. I would like to stay with our existing precinct lines. So we will use the Esri deviation as our guiding lead point for that purpose.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead, Ms. Stopmeyer.
so even though the material is already being entered, I'd still like to move that we consider no maps that are not in line with the contiguity standard. I think that that's important. It's an area where we could be challenged. It's not common, apparently, that this happens, that there are non-contiguous districts. The language is districts shall be contiguous, and I think we have to give meaning to that. So I would move that we only consider maps that respect contiguity as regards those areas in Osceola, as well as City of Howell and Marion Township.
Mr. Chair, I'm missing my hand sign. I can't find it on my computer, but I do want to weigh in on a couple comments on continuity. One, I'm not sure how the precincts are handling for those essentially island type portions of the township. Are they in the Marion precinct or are they in the Howell precinct? Because one way or the other, you'll be splitting precincts depending on how you treat them. And I think that, then it comes down to which one you've been violating, the precinct splitting or the continuity standard. And again, on continuity, I think you do need to analyze them sort of case by case. If they're the same precinct, they probably would be, it would probably weigh into keeping them, even though they're not contiguous, and it may militate against that if you would actually split precincts in order to make that change as well. And obviously continuity, if you do something really drastically lacking continuity, if you decide to lump Fowlerville and Pinckney because they're both villages, I think you'd have a problem. Because you wouldn't have it anywhere in the neighborhood even. But essentially, I think you need to look at the impact on the precincts, which may overlap with the continuity issue if you've got small islands that are close to, but not completely contiguous.
There's a motion by Commissioner Dobmeyer. Is there a second? There's a motion by Commissioner Dobmeyer. Is there a second? Hearing none, the motion will not be considered at this time. Again, I would Is there any further discussion of the maps at this time? Pending our request to the attorney for the commission to file the request to the Court of Appeals. Hearing none, we're on to next meeting date. I would propose that we try to set up a next meeting date before October the 11th, but not too soon to allow Mr. Stoker to file the request with the Court of Appeals.
Mr. Chair, could we look at potentially October 7th, please, for this, holding this meeting?
Mr. Chair, I do know I am out of town at a seminar all day.
On the 7th?
Yeah.
I will be out of town on the 8th.
The 6th?
As long as Finance Committee's over before, I mean, what we will have to watch is there is a Finance Committee meeting on October 6th.
What about the
and,
afternoon of October 6th?
Good luck. Sorry, I had to mute myself there. Maybe late afternoon on the 6th.
Well, Tuesday morning, what about October the 5th? That gives 1, 2, 3. That's cutting it short. It was 4 days from the Court of Appeals for Branch County.
I'm checking.
I have a county clerk conference that date. If I have to miss it, then I will put this as a priority. But they're covering some very important material that if possible, I would like to attend that conference.
How about if we set it up for the afternoon of October the 6th then?
Yes, please. If it works for others.
That works for me.
That works for me.
So 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock?
3 o'clock?
Basically, if we get the extension, I'm going to end up canceling the meeting rather than,
Okay.
and just have the secretary reach out to all the other commissioners for another convenient date.
I think 1 o'clock would be fine then. I'm extremely confident we will get the extension.
Let's try 1 o'clock then. And we'll just see if board chambers are available or still in use at that point in time. I don't remember exactly, but I think the last finance went well into 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
How about if we do 2 o'clock on October the 6th?
Okay. That's good with me.
Does
That works
work
with
for
me.
everybody?
Yes. Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Ms. Dunbar.
what would the agenda of this meeting be then? Just discussion, or will there be elimination of maps or?
I would look at discussion of the maps as being on the agenda. Quite possibly another legal update from Mr. Stoker. And if we do not receive an extension, I would expect that we would have a discussion fully regarding the maps and our possible adoption, or hopefully an adoption of one of the maps that's been submitted.
Thank you for that. And how would you anticipate that we would proceed to vote on maps? Would we vote by, say, eliminating maps? Or just the first one to get 3 votes and we're done? Or how do you anticipate we would proceed?
Before we move on any map, I would think that it would be appropriate for each commissioner to discuss the maps that have been submitted and their top 1 or 2 maps from those that have been submitted.
Okay, thank you.
I would like for all of us, rather than jump on jump off
Right.
over and done with map selection. I'd like to have us all discuss the maps that have been submitted. Each of us have an equal opportunity.
Very good. Thank you.
So October the 6th, 2:00. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Support.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.